Hi, Geshe.
Hi.
Hello. Yeah, I think we can start. I will just say a few words before.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Let's start.
so, can you hear me? Yeah. So I wanted to just review. I think most of us are not new here, but anyhow, I want to review just also some general information about the course. So first of all, we have the text of the course and all the information in the website of Dharma Friends of Israel. So you can find it there, including all the text that we are reading from. Also, there is a WhatsApp group that get notifications and also recorded meditations that we have here in the sessions. So if you want to join this WhatsApp group, it's only me sending the information, so it's not a very active group, just very limited information about the course, usually once a week. So you can contact me. I sent here my email and phone number, so you can contact me using those to if you want to join the group. I will also mention that there are meetings 1 hour before we start here using the same link. This is meeting to discuss and raise questions about the topics from this class. It's done in Hebrew, so sorry for whoever is not speaking Hebrew, but for whoever is and wants to join, feel free. It's very recommended. And last but not least, of course, Dana. So this course, like all activity of Dharma Friends of Israel, is done voluntary. We have a chance, actually, by practicing Dana, the generosity of the heart, to be part of the causes and conditions that make those things happen, to spread this knowledge, and of course to support a wonderful teacher that week after week just keep on giving us this really wonderful teachings. So if you want to practice Dana, then you can also follow the link or using the website. You have it here in the chat. So thank you very much, Geshe, and thank you all for being here.
Okay, great. Thank you, Shir. Let's start right away with setting the motivation as usual. Do some breathing meditation first, and then I'll guide you through the meditation. So now in the space in front of you, visualize Buddha Shakyamuni, who appears as a manifestation of his great compassion and his wisdom in the form of a fully ordained monk. Wearing saffron robes. Manifestation for us to see that enlightenment is possible. And the Buddha is surrounded by all the other great masters of India and Tibet. Nagarjuna, Chandakirti, and so forth, all these great masters whose teachings are still around. Again, inspiring and assisting us, showing us that it's possible to become enlightened ourselves. And showing us for whom we become enlightened, well, all sentient beings who are all surrounding us, surrounding the visualization in front of us, and surrounding ourselves, are all sentient beings with their confusion, misapprehension, and other afflictive emotions. Leading to limitless types of suffering. First, generate a sense of closeness towards all these sentient beings, thinking they're just like myself, and that they just want to be happy and not to suffer. And then to that feeling of closeness, add the sincere wish, may they be free from all their sufferings, from all their limitations. In that way, generate great compassion, an affection that wishes for all sentient beings to be free from suffering. And then think, may I be able to free all sentient beings from their suffering and from the causes of their suffering, from all their limitations. May I be able to liberate them from all these obstructions. And this wish then turns into a determination. I will do all I can to liberate other sentient beings from their sufferings and the causes of their suffering, which is the special altruistic attitude. But since I can only do this, and since I can only effectively lead other sentient beings to a state of freedom from suffering and the causes of suffering, if I become a Buddha myself, therefore generate the determination, I will become a Buddha. I will attain enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And with this motivation, I will learn about the entry into the middle way by Chandrakirti as a further cost to take me to enlightenment for the welfare of all sentient beings. And I'm not letting go of that motivation. Let's recite the prayers together. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the accumulation of merits of practicing generosity and so forth, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings never be separated from happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. And now directed at the visualization in the space in front of you. Reverently I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time. And rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence. And turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of others to the great enlightenment. Okay, great. Now, for this coming week, again, of course, extremely important, bodhichitta, the mind of enlightenment. His Holiness mentions it over and over again. I said this before, His Holiness is not trying to entertain us, but just telling us new things, for us to hear something new. No, His Holiness insists on it. It's so important to generate bodhichitta, the mind of enlightenment. Of course, driven by concern for other sentient beings, by understanding that their faults, the things that make us angry, whatever annoys us about them, well, all that is just superficial. It's a superficial part of the mind. And the actual nature of their mind is just as pure as the mind of a Buddha. That may help us actually to get rid of our indifference, get rid of our aversion towards certain people. But what I would like you to do also for this week, so don't let go of that mind, generate it over and over again. And definitely there are times when it's harder to generate that mind, then there are times when it's easier. Never mind, it is what it is. Just this week is a new week. As His Holiness says many times, the past is gone, the past is past. Well, now there's a new week ahead of us, and to apply again bodhicitta as much as we can. But on top of that, well, you've reached the 6th chapter of the entry into the middle way. This is the time now also to put into practice your understanding of emptiness. And what you've learned, of course, from receiving teachings by the great lamas like His Holiness and so forth, if you can apply that through your self-studies, through what you've learned in this class, whatever it is, to apply that. As in, well, if you meet another person, or if you meet trouble, this is the time to apply that. At the very least, to remember it doesn't exist the way it appears. If you just think along those lines, it takes out some of the severity, the sense this is an unsolvable problem, this is an issue I have to deal with, this is difficult, this is depressing, and so forth. All the emotional baggage that comes along with encountering a problem, whether external, internal, or both. Well, all that is lessened if we just remember, well, it doesn't exist the way it appears. It appears to be a true problem, a solid problem. Well, it isn't. Just that thought in itself will reduce already our response. But then what else have we learned? It's dependently arisen. It's the result of actions I've accumulated in the past. So I cannot just blame another person. It's also part of it. Well, I accumulated the causes and conditions. It's not about blame anyway. If you've got the causes for something, there's the result. That's just how karma works, how the law of cause and effect works, in fact. And of course, this other person, with regard to the other person, usually problems involve other people. So what have we learned about how this person exists? To just analyze the situation and generate true concern. May they be happy, although they don't exist inherently in and of themselves, but their mind wants to be happy, just like my mind wants to be happy. It's a natural wish of the mind, a natural tendency of the mind to seek satisfaction, to seek peace of mind. And just as I deserve it, they deserve it too. And it's only through temporary causes and conditions induced by a basic misapprehension of reality that the mind doesn't experience these types of emotions, these states of mind of well-being, peace of mind, and so forth. So to generate this deep concern for this other person and also bring our understanding of how this person exists. And if we can do it in the moment, great. Well, we can do it in the moment if we do it on the meditation cushion. If we think about it on our own, our mind, new pathways are created in our brain, and therefore our mind generates or gets used to, habituate, familiarizes itself with certain ideas, which then in the spur of the moment, when we face a problem, can easily be brought back. We can easily recollect, remind ourselves of them, and apply them to the situation. So bring both into your daily life, love and compassion, bodhicitta, again and again. And at the very least, remember, the other person doesn't exist the way they appear. The problem doesn't exist the way it appears, at the very least. And if you can do more, great. But coming to the topic we've been studying, I've been thinking about this topic this week. Of course, I notice that there are less people attending these classes. Why? Well, for many different reasons, but one reason is definitely it's becoming harder. The topic is becoming harder. However, even though it's becoming harder, well, that is the topic that in the long term benefits us the most. Some of the topics we went through early on, compassion, generosity, those are all really, really important, and they benefit us, maybe even more in the moment, but in the long term, they cannot eliminate the root of our problems. It's only the understanding of emptiness that can really do that. However, what you're learning right now is one of the most difficult topics when it comes to emptiness. Analyzing cause and effect. That is extremely difficult. And I've maybe mentioned it before that the classic Indian texts, they often start with a more difficult topic when it comes to emptiness. Like take, for instance, Nagarjuna's fundamental wisdom, and entry into the middle way, of course, is a commentary on that. It also starts with one of the more difficult topics when it comes to emptiness. Difficult in the sense the emptiness is the same, but the basis being cause and effect. The basis being cause and effect, conventionally existent cause and effect, that's already difficult in itself. And then you're asked to understand its emptiness. The basis is not easily understood. And on top of that, it's not easily identified. And then you're asked to think of its emptiness. It's like talking about, as Geshe would say, potokoto. Potokoto. That's Geshe-la's way of saying something we don't know, right? Like something we have no idea of, just something potokoto. Well, it's actually, we usually uses that for something that doesn't exist. But the point is, to us, it may as well be non-existent. The ideas that are presented to us, what are you talking about? Potokoto. And then the emptiness of potokoto. Great. Well, thank you very much. Okay. But of course, like I said, it's initially, this is just the style of teaching, present you with the hardest bit. And those who remain, well, they remain to the end. And the rest of it, well, okay, what to do? Maybe they get back to it at some point. Okay. Now, what I wanted to say, something that I haven't mentioned yet, and it's also, someone keeps sending me questions, and they're really nice questions. This person is really thinking about it deeply, and I want to answer these questions as we go along. And one question this person asked quite a long time ago, I actually want to answer in this context now. And what he says is something that a lot of people ask naturally, because it's so hard to grasp the idea of imputation. And I've mentioned it all the time. It's not mentioned in this text as such, but it's kind of a given. So I want to say something about that, but also kind of tie it back into what we're doing right now. What are you most familiar with when it comes to analyzing emptiness, when it comes to meditating on emptiness? Usually two things that you analyze. It's either the self or something other than the self. A car, a table, a chariot. Okay, that's the old example. We don't have many chariots that we're familiar with. So a lot of the times we use a table or we use a car. Those are the objects we usually analyze, right? Okay. So when you do this analysis, if the table, if the car, if the eye existed in and of itself, assuming hypothetically they really existed the way they appear to us and we were to analyze them, we wouldn't need anything else to analyze them. We wouldn't need, in the case of the eye, we don't need mind and body, because it would be inherently independently existent, and you could think about the self without thinking about something other than the self, say mind, body, and so forth. All right. If the car existed in and of itself and you were to analyze it, well, besides the fact you couldn't analyze it in the first place, but let's leave that aside. Let's assume the car existed inherently. Well, if it existed in and of itself independently the way it appears, you don't need to think of something other than the car, such as the door of the car or the tire of the car, the steering wheel, the engine, and so forth. We wouldn't have to think about these aspects because, well, it exists. If it existed in and of itself, you could just think of the car and didn't have to think of anything else. Same is true for the table. But of course, we know table, car, eye, they don't exist in and of themselves, which is why we need other aspects to think about. Which in general, the meditation that we usually do, the one that is described, for instance, in the fundamental wisdom, when the text talks about the Tathagata is not one with the aggregates, not other than the aggregates, Tathagata being the Buddha, it's not in the aggregates, it's not dependent on the aggregates. This particular verse, which His Holiness often says, needs to be taken. Instead of saying Tathagata, we should say the I doesn't exist as one with the aggregates, as different from the aggregates being mind and body, and so forth. So what do we do then? We take the I, and when we take something other than the I, which is mind and body, and we analyze them together, we look for the I, in other words, we analyze the I in relation to mind and body. And that actually relates to dependent arising. The dependent arising, and you're aware that there are three types of dependent arising: dependence on causes and conditions, dependence on parts, and dependence on imputation. This analysis of the parts of the I and the I, that analysis, or the parts of the car and the car, that relates to the second and the third type of dependent arising, right? Dependence on parts. Well, the car. What is the car? Which of its parts is it? It's none of its parts. It doesn't exist within the parts, outside of the parts, etc. That is an analysis basically in the context of dependence on parts. It is also at the same time analysis of dependence on labeling, because what is the basis of imputation? The car's parts, the parts of the car. What is my basis of imputation? What is the basis for me labeling I? Well, my aggregates, my mind and body. Okay, so the basis on which I label is this mind and body. On the basis of that, I then label I. And in that case, here we're basically dealing with the second and the third type of dependent arising. But what we're studying now, as part of the beginning of the 6th chapter, we are not studying the second and the third type of dependent arising, but the first type. We're studying dependence on causes and conditions. All right? And that's different. We're not that familiar with it. As I said, it's harder because we don't know bodhichitta. We don't know this dependence on causes and conditions. We're not really familiar with it. So we learn parallel to learning about its emptiness, or the emptiness or the lack of cause and effect being inherently different. Besides learning that, we learn about cause and effect. Okay, so it's a double challenge, if you like. All right, but having said all that, because I received this question and I keep saying things are labeled, things are imputed, and I just said it, the I is merely labeled on the basis of its parts. And well, realizing this question kind of reflects a very common misunderstanding, I thought I'd say a few words about that. That will also help you, hopefully, in bringing the Dharma into your daily life, the way I asked you to do so early on, saying generate bodhicitta and remember whatever you can about emptiness in that moment. Bring that also into that moment, especially when you face difficulties. That should be, when we say taking refuge in the Dharma is taking refuge in those two aspects. You may eat a bar of chocolate. You may, I don't know, lie down and take a nap when you have this problem. That's also a way of taking refuge, kind of seeking some help to that problem in the chocolate or what have you. No one says you can't do that, but most effectively is seek refuge in, or seek a solution to this problem by remembering bodhicitta. Why am I here? For the benefit of all sentient beings. And sentient beings, the problems, whatever there is, doesn't exist the way it appears, and whatever else you can remember. Okay, so for that, you need to get a better understanding of labeling. Of course, I cannot convey you that better understanding. Most important is that you listen to a Lama who's realized this, who's understood this. His Holiness, perfect person to listen to on this. Listen again and again and again. And what Geshe Kelsang advises many times, he says, His Holiness oftentimes seems to be saying the same thing. But if you think about these aspects, such as bodhicitta, such as emptiness, if you bring this into your own life and you reflect on that, every time you listen to His Holiness, you hear something different because you go deeper. you go deeper into this. And Geshe, in one of his teachings, he actually says that sometimes just for fun, well, not so much for fun, but really as part of his Dharma practice, he says he takes one aspect of Dharma. The example he gave was, for instance, the view of dependent arising and the conduct of non-violence. And he just reflects on that. He doesn't reflect on anything else. That is his topic, and reflects on that whenever he's got time, right? Think about how deep you can go in your own life to find this, well, interdependence as one aspect, the view of interdependence, and the conduct of non-violence, of like love and compassion being included in that. Think what deep understanding you can generate, not by reading all these books about it. No, you yourself generate understanding. You meditate on that, in other words. And then next time you hear about it from His Holiness, different understanding. You go much deeper. And that's why I'm asking you to bring this into your daily life, to reflect upon these parts. It's not like on your meditation cushion, you think of bodhichitta and all that, and the rest of the day is the normal life. Your normal life should be the Dharma. That should become your normal life. And then you live your ordinary life together with the Dharma, making your ordinary life a cause to enlightenment. But bringing this back, understanding imputation, labeling. When I say the I is merely labeled on the basis of the body or the mind, well, there's a question someone asked, and this question was with regard to, okay, so things are merely labeled. Things exist conventionally, therefore, the person asks. And this is a very common question. So this person says, well, let's imagine, let's think, when we say conventional, it means like there's a group of people basically have a convention. We agree to call this a car, for instance. So although there's no car found on the side of the object, but still we call it a car. Or he says, for instance, take a piece of gold. In and of itself, this gold has no value, but we give it a value. Or money, right? Money. There's no value to money in and of itself, but that is the Israeli mint, the government usually agrees. It's a group of people. They're responsible for that. They give the shekel a certain value, all right? Or the dollar in the US and so forth. So he gives this example, but then he takes it further. He says, well, imagine you have a group of people and they say there is a monster, an invisible monster that's eating them up from inside. So that means there's a conventional monster that's now invisible and is eating them up from inside. Because you could just decide that this exists. It's a convention. This is where the misunderstanding lies. Because labeling doesn't mean just making things up. It doesn't mean just making things up. Now, when you say with the money, and his argument is it's a good argument. Well, we're making it up with the money, aren't we? What about giving money a certain value? Giving gold a certain value? Well, here what we need to understand is that labeling, you need certain aspects. It's dependent on certain aspects. One is you need a mind that labels. All right. Okay, that's pretty obvious. You need something that labels, and that is the mind. Okay. What else do you need? You need to have a basis of imputation, a basis on the basis of which you now label something. And an invisible monster, well, what is your basis of imputation? Something invisible. How can you say there is a monster? And if it eats you up inside, well, just saying that doesn't make that true. I mean, I should lose some body mass at least if it eats me up inside, right? I mean, lose some weight, or, I'm missing some organs from one day to the next because the monster is eating me up. So just saying there's this monster and everyone agreeing on it, well, there's no basis for labeling. There should be a process of this monster eating me up, as an example. All right. So it's not just saying something exists. Let's just decide and create this. No, that's not enough. There needs to be a basis of imputation. What is the basis of imputation of a monster? What is a monster? Well, it's a living being, at the very least. A living being, mind and body. Well, where's mind and body on the basis of which you label the monster? Saying it's invisible doesn't help. How do I know it's there, right? So if I decide it's there, that's just not enough. Having doubt about it's a different matter, but deciding it's there and then saying, oh, it's conventionally there, that's not enough. Now let's go back to the money. How about money? Yeah, well, money also needs a certain basis of imputation. Gold does too. Certainly, gold, it cannot be a metal that's just lying around at the side of the road, right? Gold wouldn't have the value we give it if it would just be found in our own garden. Like you walk across a road and there's a nugget of gold or something. Then it wouldn't have the value it has. It has to be rare. Okay, so the value of gold, yes, it is something we've given to it, but based on a basis of imputation, which is its rarity, number one, and certain qualities, of course. It is, what is it? It is very reflective. It looks beautiful. To some people, it looks very beautiful. I personally don't think it's beautiful, but some people think like ornaments, golden ornaments are very beautiful. The color is beautiful. It reflects the light in a beautiful way. It's rare, I already mentioned that. It's very malleable, very shapeable. It's very versatile. It's very dense. You can actually form it so that you have a tiny sheet and that still holds together. Okay, so you can use it in a very effective way. It's malleable, I said that already, formable and so forth. So the point is, it has a lot of characteristics, attributes, and based on that, then the value of a certain value is labeled, is given. This is valuable. This labeling takes place, but there must have been a basis of imputation. The same is true for money. Okay, it's not something you can easily counterfeit. You cannot easily make your own money. It's a certain type of paper, a certain print on it that cannot be counterfeited easily. Otherwise, what kind of money would that be if you just, oh, I need some 10 shekel, let me just make one. Okay, here it is, right? It wouldn't work that way. Therefore, a certain basis needs to be there. And based on that function, on that basis, if there's a function that comes along with that basis, then we label this, that, and the other. Otherwise, yeah, anything would be possible. But labeling doesn't mean anything is possible, that suddenly there are invisible monsters that eat us from within. No. And we do not go around and suddenly give tiny pebbles, like little pieces of stones, a certain value and start paying for them again. No, that's not a basis of imputation. Okay, so certain attributes have to be there. Then we can say it is labeled. And what is that labeling? The question that also arises is, how does that labeling take place? We have this idea, oh, I have to give it a name. I have to say, oh, this is gold. Now I've labeled. All right, we all kind of come together. We have a meeting or something, and then say, oh, this is gold. Well, that's labeling as well, but that's a very coarse way of labeling. Or when we were children, learning the name of something, that in itself, yes, that's labeling, but that's a very coarse type of labeling. What is actual labeling? Labeling is the thought, it is this. Okay, it is a car. The moment you think it's a car, whether you use the word car or you use it in Hebrew, whatever word you have, or even if you don't have a word. I mean, it's very hard for us to talk about thoughts we have which don't use language. How are you going to talk about a thought when you didn't use language? But there are thoughts we have, and those are harder for us to grasp because we're so used to language. But there are thoughts we have where we just use imagery, just use an image of something, like it's called a meaning generality, as opposed to a word generality. A word generality is the word that we think of when we think in words. So oftentimes when we have a train of thought, as it's called, a train of thought, that's a nice expression, where you think of this and this and this and the next and so forth. So you use language oftentimes, but oftentimes it's not language. It's not language. It's just, it's this, it's that. So this process is a process of labeling. In fact, we label all the time. We have these thoughts continuously. There are some scholars who say every thought is a labeling thought. There are some scholars who say, no, it's only the thoughts when you think, oh, it is this, and it's not that. I feel it's much more any thought we have, we label. We take a basis, and based on that, we go, this is nice, this is not nice, this is fair, this is not fair. This person is a good person, this person is an evil person. So we label all the time, this narrating. right? You notice this when you try to meditate, narrating, talking all the time. That's labeling. You're labeling in that moment. You're not saying, oh, I'm calling it this and I'm calling it that. No, you're making sense of your reality. You're labeling. And that's great. That's good. We need labeling. We need to categorize things, make sense, differentiate this from that. All these appearances, all these things that appear to us, to now differentiate. And other people help us to do so. We grow up as social animals, as the Holmes would put it. Therefore, we grow up in a community. We learn certain ideas of categorization. We are taught, they're acquired. Other ones are very unique to just us, right? What I like, what I don't like, may not even know what another person likes and doesn't like. It's my own personal kind of preference, etc. But every thought is labeling. This is this is that. And the labeling is great. But then once we label, we say, oh, this is good in relation to me, of course. It's always happening in relation to I, right? Everything, every judgment I make, every thought I have, it's always directly or indirectly in relation to me. But when I do that, then I've labeled. But the problem then is once I've labeled, I believe it's already that, it's good or bad already. It is, and I've only called it that. I only had that thought because it is already. That's the problem. That's where we add too much. We just label it. We just think it's good. In relation to this, that, and the other, there's the thought pleasant, unpleasant. In relation to my experience, I labeled this object pleasant. Okay. But then I believe, oh, this pleasantness is over there. That's where the mistake comes in. But we don't blame the labeling for that. That's not the labeling's fault. It's the misapprehension, the basic misapprehension. All right. I just wanted to say that. So that's labeling your thoughts, your daily thoughts. Daily, am I kidding? Every second we're labeling, we're reinforcing. There's change there, but we're also reinforcing our labeling from last week, and so forth. And it's reinforcing the sense of I in our relation with other people. That's why it's so difficult to be on your own, social distancing. We have such a hard time to reinforce our sense of I, our self-identity, right? Because we have it in relation with other people. That's why we often crave this interaction with other people. We can reinforce, and we need that. Of course, it's necessary to just label, to have a self-identity. But the problem is where we exaggerate, where we believe now there's an intrinsic good, bad, failure, and success, etc. Okay, and there is no inherent I, because to me I'm I, but to my mother I'm a daughter, to my sister I'm a sister, to my brother I'm a sister, to my cousin I'm a cousin, to my nephew I'm an aunt. I'm all these things, but different things to different people, right? You think about that. So what am I? Am I? Only in relation to me. I'm you in relation to you. I'm other. I'm stranger to the person in the supermarket. I don't care person, across the street. Okay. And again, only in relation to that person. In and of itself, I'm neither I, nor other, nor sister, nor mother. Well, mother anyway, I'm not. There's no even a basis for imputation, but not daughter. I'm not wife. Okay, there's no basis for imputation of that. But I'm not sister. I'm not aunt, and so forth. All right. So that was a very quick, rushed through explanation of labeling being existed independence on labeling. So to just wrap it up, to go back to our topic, what we're basically dealing with, what we're analyzing in the context of analyzing emptiness is dependent arising, which means that nothing exists in and of itself. Because first of all, it's dependent, which means it's dependent on causes and conditions. It's dependent on parts, and it's dependent on labeling based on those parts. Being given a name, given or having a concept, developing a concept of I, other, aunt, woman, etc., on the basis of a certain basis of imputation. Okay. Now, what are we dealing with here? Very difficult, cause and effect. Difficult for several reasons. One of the most difficult aspects is that cause and effect don't exist at the same time. I think that's hard for us. If they just existed at the same time, if you could just kind of clump them together in one, it would almost be, it's so much easier to think a car and its parts, whereas a seed over there and a sprout over, it's kind of like, ugh, they don't even exist at the same time. That's difficult. But also, all we see with a car, you have all these nitty-gritty details, but what is it about a cause and effect? You have a seed, you have a sprout, that's it. But these functions that we explained last time, well, they're not obvious to us. These functions of producing and ceasing, remember? I mean, in the car, it's obvious. It's running, it's doing this, it's doing that. I mean, the sense of agency, already mentioned that. It's a little weird to us, the sense of agency. But we use it for a car too. The car's running well. The car broke down, the car this, the car that. So they're inanimate objects, and still we ascribe them a certain activity, which, you know, there's no personality within that car, just as there's no personality within the person. I mean, even that, like, there's no self, no agent that's doing all these things. It's just mind and body working together, being responsible for a person acting in a certain way. Likewise, a car, certain parts coming together. There's no carness, just as there's no I or personness kind of inherent within mind and body that's controlling the whole thing. Well, likewise, there's no carness that's kind of running and driving and braking and so forth. It's just labeled. Just as we label the car, we label certain activities that the car performs. That being the case, that's also true for a seed. A seed as a cause. We call it a cause. We label it cause. Why? Because we can observe the seed when it transforms and becomes something that we no longer call seed. We now call it a sprout. Therefore, on that conventional basis, seed transforming, and at some point it's called a sprout. Therefore, oh, it's a conventional sprout now. Where does it come from? Well, from the seed being there first, and the transformation of the seed making the sprout possible, leading to the sprout, in other words. And if this process, this continuum of a seed transforming and becoming a sprout, well, that we call cause and effect. And in what way is that important? How is that important to us? Who cares about seeds and sprouts unless you're a gardener? Well, it's only because it's easier to understand on the basis of those two. Why am I experiencing what I'm experiencing? Where does that come from? Why am I this person now? And who am I going to be in the future? Well, for that, of course, it's important to understand exactly that process. Just as the seed becomes the sprout, yesterday's Kelsang Wangmo becomes today's Kelsang Wangmo. And this life's Kelsang Wangmo becomes next life's Kelsang Wangmo, and so forth. And the transformation I go through in this life, which I can affect with my mind in particular, they have an influence on the result. They have an effect, or they affect the result, which will be in the future life. And if I don't want to suffer, well, it's in my own hand. As was only said this morning, I'm my own master. If you were there this morning, if you listened this morning. So I'm my own master. We are our own master. It's in my own hand, but I need to get a better understanding of causes and conditions. I am creating my own experiences. I'm responsible for my happiness, my suffering. Instinctively, I blame others. Instinctively, we have this tendency, oh, it's his fault, it's her fault. We don't even know we do this. And we don't really look out for our own actions. For instance, to act with anger. It's a classic example of not really understanding cause and effect. What did we learn? Can we make the harm of the other person, the insult, can we make it undone? No. What was the insult created by? By me getting angry in the past. Great. So now I create the causes for a new insult. I'm getting angry that I get insulted now, which is the result of insulting another person. And instead of going, all right, okay, now I have to be careful. I've just experienced the result of insulting someone. So I should not insult the other person. No way. I double insult them. I go out of my way. How dare they? That is a classic understanding of not understanding cause and effect. I just created the causes for a double insult. I had a single insult I experienced today and a double one I created for the future. Thank you very much. But to me, it seems, oh, no, it was the other person's fault. I didn't do anything wrong. I was kind and I helped them. And it's not the whole picture. It's not the whole picture. Maybe I was kind in that moment. All right, maybe I didn't do, but that's not the whole picture. We're just zooming in on one aspect and we don't see the whole. What is the whole? I created those causes in the past. As the Solness talks about it, we're too narrow-minded. Wide-sided. We need to be much more wide-sided. And wide-sided doesn't just mean take binoculars, like, telescope and look far. No, look in the past and in the future. It includes that. All right, and understand that we create our experiences. So cause and effect are really important. And if you were there with Yangde Rinpoche's teachings, Yangde Rinpoche said, Yangde Rinpoche talked about concordant causes and discordant causes. The other person is not the cause for my suffering. I am the main cause for my suffering, and so forth. Okay, so I don't need to go more into detail on that, but just to encourage you, to give you another, to put it into perspective, in the sense that, why do we talk about cause and effect? All right, let's go back. Sprout and seed. Seed and sprout. It's not directly beneficial, but it helps us to understand it in the whole context. All right. Now, what are we analyzing? We're no longer analyzing the result and its parts. So me, the resultant I, a result of my yesterday's I, and my parts, mind and body. No, we are now analyzing the result in relation to its cause. Okay, so the analysis here is result and cause, taking those two together and checking what is their relationship. Are they the same or are they different? Well, they're obviously not the same. We went through it. They're not the same. They're not identical. So the other option is that they're different. But different here means not conventionally different, but the way it appears to us. It seems you have a seat, just as the car seems to be a car over there and not just labeled. The table seems to be a table in and of itself, independently a table. The same is true for the eye. Well, likewise, we have a sense there's a sprout now. Previously, there was a seed, but those are totally different. They look different. So they must be totally different. And last time we went through the reasoning. If they were totally different, the way it appears to us, just there's a seedness. There's some nature of being a seed within the seed, and there's a nature of being a sprout within the sprout, and those are totally different. Well, that means they're inherently different. And that is what's the other extreme. Either an effect and its cause are identical, as in like inseparable. And that would mean at the time of the cause, you already have the result, and we went through the absurdity of that. Or they're inherently different. And if they're inherently different, then my own mind didn't create my experiences. No, of course not. Then if I study today, tomorrow I won't have knowledge. Or without studying, I would know everything today. Okay, so from a rice seed, you have a barley sprout. From darkness, you have light, and so forth. Anything is possible. And of course, that's not the case. There must be a connection between cause and effect. So they're not disconnected. All right, so that's what we've learned last time. And what else we learned? What about the activity? And this is what's interesting. And here it's less about understanding that phenomena do not exist inherently. It's just in the context of the reasoning, saying, well, what was that reasoning? What was the reasoning for saying if the seed and the sprout are inherently different, not only does it lead to the absurdity, that they are totally disconnected and any result can arise from any cause, therefore, because anything is possible. No, also on top of that, that would mean that the seed must be different from the sprout, right? If seed and sprout are inherently different, if they're different, then inherently, I should add, if they're inherently different, then the seed must also be inherently different from the sprout. So it must be in its nature, it must carry within it being different from the sprout. If that's inherent, if that's intrinsic, if that's not merely labeled, but intrinsic within the seed, that it's inherently different from the sprout, well, at the time of the seed, you must have a sprout. If something is by its own nature is different from the sprout, we must have a sprout. It can't be in the nature of the seed to be different from the sprout without a sprout. And that would mean that at the time when you have the seed, you must have a sprout, because it's in the nature of that seed at that moment it's in the nature of that seed to be different from the sprout, and you must have a sprout then. How can it be different from the sprout if there's no sprout in that moment? From a Buddhist point of view, it's merely labeled. We're saying that in relation to what's going to come, we say that based on that, we say the seed is different. There's no nature of difference within the seed. So they're not inherently different. They're just labeled on the basis that they look slightly differently. We say they're different, okay? But there's no nature within it. Remember, I talked about the nature of water being wet, etc. It seems it's just independently just wet. And again, there's no nature of water. There's no absolute nature of being wet within the water, because it's dependent on many other things other than water that accounts for water being wet. So it's also not, in an absolute sense, it's not in the nature of water to be wet. Being wet is labeled on the basis of the experience we have with our human skin. We experience it as wet. That's why we say it's in the nature of water to be wet, but it's not absolute that way. All right. Now, in that context, therefore, having said so, Chandrakirti argues, if the sprout and the seed, if they were inherently different, they would have to exist at the same time. And now someone else argues and says, well, they do exist at the same time. Oh, I forgot to bring the scale. It's down in the kitchen, never mind. So it's like a scale, using a scale. When one is ascending, the other one is descending. When this is ascending, this one is descending, and the other way around. So the activities of those two, of course, a scale, they exist at the same time, or the two parts of the scale, the two ends of the scale, I should say, these little cups, or plates, or whatever they look like, the ends of the scale. So when one rises, the other one goes down, the other one goes up, the other one goes down, the other one goes down, the other one goes up. So these happen simultaneously, but of course you can't compare the two because they exist simultaneously. Cause and effect are different. They don't exist simultaneously. But what did we learn? And this is a little bit difficult, but I'll just mention it, and probably you've understood it by now, but just to make sure, we say the seed at the time of the seed, when the seed exists, it is producing the sprout. We label that because this transformation of the seed, based on the transformation of the seed, moment by moment, it's transforming, moving closer to becoming the sprout. Based on that, we label the seed is producing the sprout, right? That's why we say the seed is producing the sprout. You don't have a little kind of seed master saying, let's produce the sprout, taking like a little axe or whatever you need to, I don't know, I mean, doing something, right? Like it seems like with this agency, there's like a little being in that seed. Let's produce. But of course, that's not happening. We're just labeling the seed is producing the sprout on the basis of the fact that there's a seed that's from moment to moment different. And at some point, we now call it a sprout, because it looks so different from the seed. So now we say, oh, there's the sprout, there's the flower. Based on that, we say the seed, while it was there, it was producing the sprout. Makes sense, doesn't it? But at the same time as it was producing the sprout, if we talk about the sprout, so from the perspective of the seed, it was producing the sprout. From the perspective of the seed was arising. Okay, so from both perspectives, we can label. based on the fact that the seed is itself changing moment by moment, to eventually in the future become a flower or sprout, a flower, whatever, we say the seed is producing the flower while it is there. Based on the fact that in the future you have that seed, you have that flower, you say at the time of the seed, based on that, you say at the time of the seed, you say the flower is arising. Okay, it's coming into existence. It's coming into existence. It's arising. We label that. At that time, there is no flower yet. Okay, does that make sense? The flower is arising. The sprout is arising at the time of the seed. At the same time, from another perspective, we say the seed is ceasing. The seed is ceasing. Why? It's moving closer towards the moment, when there's no longer a seed, when there's now a sprout. Based on that, we say the seed is going out of existence while it's bringing the sprout into existence. Okay, it's another way of saying the seed is ceasing, and the seed is ceasing, and the sprout is arising, or it's producing the sprout. Okay, and the argument of the other person is just knowing this is confusing. It's confusing. It was confusing to the people there, so that's why the argument was put forth. It's confusing because we have a sense, oh, the sprout is arising when the sprout is there. No. Then it has arisen. It has arisen. It was produced. It can't be there if it wasn't produced. Okay, so it's there now. It's there. It produces its next moment, but it's already there. All right. Okay. And so the argument of the other person was basically, well, if the seed existed, if the two ends of a scale, right, they exist at the same time because their activity exists at the same time of ascending and descending, and therefore the other person says, likewise, the seed ceasing and the sprout arising, those two exist at the same time. Therefore, seed and sprout must exist at the same time. No, only if they existed inherently. If they existed inherently, sure. If you have a seed arising, it has to be there. You have to have a seed for it to arise. If that was in the nature of a sprout arising. If you have a sprout arising, if that was in the nature of the seed, and it would exist in and of itself, you need to have a sprout for something to be arising. But this is just labeled on the basis of the fact that in the future you have a sprout. Therefore, although those two activities are there at the same time, the ceasing of the seed and the arising of the sprout doesn't mean that seed and sprout exist at the same time. All right. So what did you learn? Two things. It's confusing. What did you learn? What you learn is basically this activity, ceasing, arising, how we apply this terminology to be conventionally correct. And of course, most importantly, when we say cause and effect are different, that's merely labeled. It's not in and of itself. Okay. Having said that, I'll go back. I haven't forgotten with the meditation. I meant to meditate at the very beginning, but then I just changed my mind on that. So we'll do the meditation, but before that, I'll just finish those other verses. I'm pretty sure it's clear. I hope it's clear now. We got to verse 18. I just described 18 again. If some of the verses are not clear, you can always ask again, just send a message to Shir. I'll re-explain those verses. Otherwise, you have the chance, of course, in the discussion group. All right, verse 19. So if you're not Hebrew speaking, of course, you can always send a message to Shir. And the person who has sent messages, I hope I answered one of his questions, and the rest I'll do as I continue, because the topic is not the right topic yet to address his other questions. Once we get to the true truth, I'll do that. Anyway, so now we come to verse 19. Okay, verse 19, if we could have that. Am I talking too fast? Am I talking too? No. Okay, thank you. 19. Could we have 19? So in verse 19, Chandrakirti is saying, well, it's not the same. You cannot compare the scale, or the two ends of the scale as described before, because here it says, for as you contend, that which is arising is about to arise. So the sprout is about to arise. It's arising, which is another word of say, is another way of saying it's about to have arisen or to arise. So it does not yet exist. At the time of the seed, the sprout does not yet exist because it is arising, which is saying it's about to arise. It's about to be there. While that which is ceasing, the seed itself, though it exists, it's about to disintegrate, about to be gone. So here, about to arise, the arise here means having arisen, and it's about to disintegrate. Here, the disintegrate means to have disintegrated. Okay. In English, it's kind of, yeah, in Tibetan, it's got more of the sense of like that which is arising right now is moving closer towards the state where it has arisen. Therefore, it's not there yet. As long as it's not arisen, it's not there yet. And that arising happens at the time of the seed. The ceasing also happens at the time of the seed. But seed and sprout don't exist at the same time. If this is so, how can such a case be likened to a scale? You can't compare those two with a scale because it's different. The two ends of a scale exist simultaneously, but seed and sprout don't. It makes no sense to speak of an arising when there's no producer. So it doesn't make sense to speak of an arising. You have to talk about the arising of the sprout in connection to the producer. So when there's no producer, it doesn't make sense that there's an arising. To talk about the arising or the producing at the time of the sprout doesn't make sense because the producer is no longer there. Yeah, anyway. So producer, of course, don't think of a film producer. Well, you won't. Okay, now that's the argument so far that was given. And then someone else comes along and argues in verse 20, someone argues, well, I'm saying cause and effect exist at the same time. So your whole argument, Chandrakirti, your argument, when you say that the seed and the sprout are not inherently different, because otherwise the seed, it would be in the nature of the seed to be inherently different from the sprout, but sprout and seed do not exist at the same time. My argument would be cause and effect do exist at the same time. Seed and sprout exist at the same time. Or another example, visual cognition. When I visually cognize something, what exists at the time as itself, at the same time as the visual cognition, you have the eye sense power, and so forth, which includes the object over there. So while you perceive a vase or a table, for instance, you have the table, you have the eye sense power, you have discernment, the mental factor of discerning, being able to recognize and so forth. So there it's producer, they give rise. Actually, they give rise to this visual cognition, this other person, this opponent says. So what need is there for it to arise since the first two lines, it's actually the first two lines. That's what an opponent says. This opponent says, well, I believe there is cause and effect that exists at the same time. Your whole argument revolves around saying that cause and effect don't exist at the same time, but I believe they do. Actually, from a Buddhist point of view, no way. Cause and effect do not exist at the same time. So some people may argue, well, what about smoke and fire? They exist at the same time. You see a fire, you see smoke. But actually, the fire and the smoke you see together, they're not cause and effect. It's a moment of fire that existed a moment earlier, which gave rise to the smoke right now. And the fire right now gives rise to the smoke a moment later. So what we see existing at the same time, they're not connected to in the way of cause and effect. So you may, if it's not clear, you can discuss this in the discussion group. I don't want to go into too much detail, but anyway, sometimes two things exist at the same time, but we don't say that those two are related to, as cause and effect. So likewise here, when you perceive an object with your sense consciousnesses, when you see a table, for instance, well, first you need to have an eye sense power, whatever happens on a physical level, the light rays that bounce off the vase, that bounce off the table that's there, that hits your retina, all that's happening on a physical level. You need a few moments, however short they are, maybe just I don't know, a tenth of a second. It doesn't take long, but that is the cause for a moment later to have a cognition. It doesn't happen simultaneously, even though the process is so quick. It may seem they happen simultaneously, but that's not the case. There's some time in between. And in actuality, you have the I and the object over there. So the I sense power, you have the object over there, and you have a moment of awareness, being aware of something else, and all that, those coming together. A moment later, there's an awareness, there's a perception of an object, of a table, for instance. So although it seems they're there simultaneously, no, they're not. Because if an effect exists at the same time of a cause, Chandrakirti says, what need is there for it to arise? What need is there for the result, the cognition of the table to arise, when it's already there at the time of its cause? Why does it need a cause if it's already there? We're talking about the cause. Its transformation gives rise to the result, however short the cause is. If you say it does not yet exist, if you say at the time of the cause you don't have a result, well, we have already shown the faults of this, to say that cause and effect don't exist at the same time, but they're inherently different. But that is faulty, this assertion I've already shown before. So they don't exist at the same time. If cause and effect were inherently different, they would have to exist at the same time, as shown before. Okay. And then the last verse before we start with the true truth, and we finish with that today. And then verse 21 is already the beginning. Oh, no. No, it's actually 22 with 20. Oh, yeah, 21. We read 21 exactly. And then 22 starts the true truth, the conventional and ultimate truth. We start with that. Okay, let's read 21. If the cause is a producer that produces something inherently other, something that is inherently other than itself, is what it produces either inherently existent? Is it totally non-existent? Is it both inherently existent and totally non-existent? Or is it neither? Not inherently existent and not non-existent. We would probably choose the last one. But if it is produced from something that already exists inherently, if a producer, if a cause gives rise to something that's inherently other, then the cause has to be inherently existent. How can it give rise to something that is neither inherently existent nor non-existent? It's impossible. None of those are possible. None of those extremes. So something inherently existent, something non-existent, something both existent or non-existent, or neither here in the sense extreme, because we're assuming that something inherently existent gives rise to those. And again, that would be impossible. If existent, what need is there? If it exists inherently, why does it need a producer? If it exists inherently, you don't need a producer. It's inherently there. It doesn't depend on anything. If non-existent, if something doesn't exist, what kind of cause can do anything to it? If something is non-existent, it doesn't have a cause. It doesn't have a producer. Producer is really just another word for saying it's a cause. If it's both, again, what use is it? It's inherently there. It doesn't need a producer. It doesn't exist. Okay. If it's neither, what use does a producer serve? Again, if it's neither, why would you have a producer? It doesn't exist. It's, well, in the sense like it's inherently existent, and then it gives rise to something that doesn't exist inherently, or it's not non-existent. Why do you need a producer? It exists inherently. Okay. And then it would actually have to exist. The result will have to exist inherently too, assuming that cause and effect exist inherently. All right. So this is just wrapping it up. Verse 21. Good. Well done. I mean, well done in the sense, finally, I'm on time. I'm not too late. All right. Now, this bit is difficult. Yes, I'm aware, not impossible to understand. And of course, it'll become clearer as we go along. And then if you go back to those verses, they're much clearer. As I said, some of the Indian texts start off with a more difficult meaning. Okay. Now, what I would like to meditate on for today, I want to bring in just dependence on causes and conditions, and if there's sufficient time, so what we've learned so far, and if there's sufficient time, bring in also dependence on parts and dependence on labeling. And so in that way, go through the dependence on causes and conditions by analyzing the relationship between result and cause, which we've done the last classes and including today. And then if time, of course, dependence on parts, how that is efficient, or how that is an understanding of that is how that is helpful, and repeating what we learned about labeling today. Okay, so let's see how far we get. I don't want to rush it. And we start again with some breathing meditation, just to settle the mind, calm the mind, let go of any disruptive thoughts. Now bring your attention to the conventional I, to yourself. That is the I that is labeled on the basis of mind and body. Since it is a dependently arisen phenomenon, and since it's impermanent, it depends on causes and conditions. With today's I, depending on its cause, for instance, yesterday's I, with yesterday's I having produced your I today, your conventional self that exists today. Just as a seed produces a sprout. Of course, with the assistance of other external conditions. But nonetheless, the substantial cause of you today was you yesterday. Now, what is the connection of today's I and yesterday's I? Are they of one nature? In that today's I already existed within yesterday's I? Or are they inherently different? Since we've already seen that yesterday's I and today's I cannot be of the same nature, since today's I did not exist yesterday. Let's see whether they're inherently different. If today's I were inherently different from yesterday's I, would be in the nature of today's I to be different from yesterday's I. And it would be in the nature of yesterday's I to be different from today's I. And for that, today's I and yesterday's I would exist at the same time. For how could it be in the nature of today's I to be inherently different from yesterday's I if you don't have yesterday's I to be different from? If being different is not merely labeled. And if today's I and yesterday's I existed at the same time, today and yesterday would happen simultaneously. Which is absurd. Furthermore, they were inherently different, yesterday's I and today's I. They were inherently different. They'd be totally disconnected. And yesterday's I would not necessarily become today's I. But it could become today's neighbor. It could become a table or a car. Anything would be possible. Since being different would not just merely be labeled, but it would be an absolute difference. Therefore, our present I has arisen from yesterday's I that is merely conventionally different from today's I. Yesterday's I having transformed and being now called today's I. And in the same way as today's I is dependent on yesterday's thoughts, actions, ideas that were part of the self yesterday, it's also dependent on its paths. Today's I is dependent on countless body paths. It's dependent on the cells in the body. As well as on different types of mind, sets of consciousnesses, different types of mental awareness, imprints in the mind, and so forth. But on its deepest level, today's I is merely labeled based on a valid basis of imputation, present mind, present body. Being connected through karma, we label I. Our mental consciousness thinks I. When the leg moves, I label I move. When my head hurts, I say I'm sick. I'm unwell. And when the mind meditates, I label that as I think, I meditate. Therefore, there's no intrinsic, separate kind of I whose happiness is more important than that of others. No I that can get insulted, lose his reputation. No I that is the center of the universe. Since it's merely labeled in dependence on my mind. This particular mind the body is connected to. Creating space in my mind to be not just concerned for myself, but for the welfare of other sentient beings, who, even though they're just labeled, exist conventionally, deserve conventional existence, conventional happiness, like myself. So now to conclude this meditation, spend a few moments to focus on whatever feeling, whatever conclusion you've come to as a result of this analysis, and just allow for this to sink deeper to a more emotional level. And then let's, of course, dedicate whatever positive potential all of us together as a group have accumulated learning about Chandrakirti's text, reflecting on its meaning and meditating on it. May this eventually lead to become a cause for our own enlightenment, but even now, have a positive effect on everything and everyone else around us. May I help that our precious teacher, Annie Lobsang, get better soon, recover from her illness. Annie Lubin, Tali Lubin, that she may totally recover. And everyone else who suffers, that they may quickly be freed from their suffering, as explained or as described by Shantideva in his dedication prayer. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled, with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry, 10 minutes past time, but please don't forget their homework. Bodhichitta together with your understanding of emptiness. All right, have a great week and take care.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Dharma friends.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you next week.